Hello, welcome to my Battle System deck profile. So I previously uploaded one, but this is a sort of different variant of the premium deck profile, where before I put in a pure Battle System deck list. This time around, this is more for a hybrid that uses the Amaterasu engine, and I'll sort of explain why a few cards have to kind of change in this version of the list. But this is a deck that I've had kind of been sitting on for a while. I just never did a deck profile on it. I've had this for ages. I've had it since almost the same time, around the same time that I did that deck profile. But I've had some requests to put this up, so here we go. I'll just put this deck that I've just found in my back pocket and go through it right now. So the starting Vanguard, just play any V starter, of course. And then 3 copies of the reverse. So this card's actually not as bad as people say it is, because it's a good ride-up. And the thing is that sometimes you just can't always win the grade 2 game. There's just so much depth down the grade 2 game that there's decks that can actually specialize it in a lot better. But with reverse, you can at least punish them. Plus, you're playing Ichikishima, so if you have a heal in hand, you can always G-Guard into Ichikishima, so it's not as bad. You can use the From Edge reverse to put a bit of pressure. It does give your units a bit of power as well as you're locking, and you're also stacking quite a good range because you're looking at quite a handful of cards and you're able to stack triggers. Sometimes you even get the over trigger, which is quite neat, so there's that too. And you can kind of just profit from a lot of free plussing, so it does build monstrous hand advantage by riding up. And then there's 4 copies of Fromage. So the thing is, this card is both a Vanguard and a Rearguard skill, so if you suppose you went in different turn order, let's just say you ride up first, you ride up second, and you ride reverse, and you don't have this card, then you can eventually draw into another copy via other cards, like for example the new Stride, or maybe Tori Jas or Trifle, etc. So it's still very useful to be able to play reverse, because you're still able to just use this later as a Rearguard skill if you can't ride it as your Vanguard, and you're still getting your Protect gifts. You're not really losing out much there. So this is just a crazy card. It's kind of the obvious, you should play this in premium kind of card, just because it doesn't really clash with Striding. And then you've got 4 copies of Amaterasu. So Amaterasu is, well, this deck is basically more around this, because this card's good for getting 10k crit, although you can't always do it, admittedly, not as easily as in Susano. But there's also defensive plays because of the G-Guardians that reveal the top card of your deck, so you can even just randomly get this sometimes as an extra trigger. Just think of it as like the additional 4 triggers in your deck, so that if you're against Murakumo or Spike Brothers or something and you need to build a bit of a power wall, then you've got that option as well. Then 4 copies of Mocha. So Mocha's actually a bit of a generic card when you ride over her. You can actually technically use any grade 3, but basically she pluses and she stacks, and it's pretty much sort of free. It's Soul Blast 1. Soul is quite scarce in this deck. That is something you need to look out for. But it's just very good in terms of free advantage. Obviously, you have to ride up to make use of this. So it's just like back in the old days with Little Witch Lulu. And why Little Witch Lulu, I never really liked it as a starter during the G-Set 5 era, because your aggression kind of goes down, your grade 2 game becomes weaker, because you have to wait until you ride grade 3 to actually get the advantage. And obviously that's why I considered Lulu an overrated starter back in the day, and why I thought Magic Calico was the better starter. But yeah, this is very handy for free passes. Also, it's a 90k beta as long as you're playing some Battle System units on the field, and she can also gain shield, which can be handy sometimes if you want to have a bit of efficient guarding. And then we've got 4 copies of Trifle. So Trifle is sort of the main finish of the deck because it's a Sentinel Restrict. Obviously, this doesn't really mean that much now, because we've got the new Blitz Order, which is obviously a problem if your opponent has that in their hand. But otherwise, even power gaining, it's not always that easy to get like a very high number. So that's obviously something to work around as well. But hopefully with some of the cards in this deck, you can sort of try and push enough. If you rush with this deck, then hopefully you can at least shave some of the shields out of your opponent's hand to make them guard a bit earlier. That way you don't need as high a number later on. Obviously, if you get the random over trigger, this card's amazing, except if the Blitz Order comes out. And also, she's quite good as a ride target. She's very rounded as a card, which is not something you can say about most OTT cards, because she gives you advantage no matter whether she's placed on Vanguard or Rearguard. So she's Counter Blast 1, check top 3, you call 1 Battle System among them, and then you stack the rest of your deck, which is very strong for a CB1 cost, because Obviously, synergy with Battle Sisters and Superior Calling. You can even call out Fromage if you have an extra CB to spare and draw 2 cards. But also just the fact, so she helps you with the grade 2 game. She can even find you cards. She can even get you Torijas. If you see Torijas and you see another Battle Sister normal unit on top of your deck, you can just call the Torijas and then add the other Battle Sister card to your hand. Like, for example, Perfect Guard, etc. And even your grade 3 Ride target. So there's quite a lot there, and you're also stacking your deck. You can even stack defensive triggers for the following turn if you don't want to stack just for offensive turns. So there's that as well. So if you're worried about your opponent high roll rushing you and so on, she's also good for that. And then just the fact that even as a rear guard, she's just going to be a beater with guard restrict on top of that. So she pretty much just does everything. She's just a very high quality grade 2. And the cornerstone, I'd say, of Battle Sisters is the deck. Now this is the change that was made. So in the other deck profile, I put in Battle Sister Sable. Battle Sister Sable is very nice if you have Battle Sister rear guards and you can draw 1. Obviously you need to have quite a handful of units with Battle Sister in the name. So with this deck being a bit more grade 3 heavy, slightly less odds of being able to pull that off, but the other reason why Sable's taken out is because of the Soul Blast cost. As you may have seen, we've got Mocha in this deck as well, who's already taking some of the Soul, and Fromage as well, so you can't just keep Soul Blasting constantly. So I made the trade-off of using Choquette, and because Choquette is a filterer, a check top 5 searcher, that makes her quite important because obviously Amaterasu synergizes with this card, whereas Sable doesn't. So you can get a bit more aggression. She's a 14k beater as well. If you get Amaterasu, 24. Obviously, not every game you're going to do that, but that's always helpful to have. Also, just good kind of like mid-game rear as well, if you don't want to commit your trifles too soon. And on top of that, you can also find your Battle Sister grade 3s. So one of the reasons Choquette was such an important card, especially before this set, the Clan Collection even, is that you could always try searching for your grade 3 Fromages by using cards like Choquette. But obviously now that we've got a second grade 3 Battle Sister, grade 3 searching isn't quite as important as it used to be. So this used to be a more important card before, but it's obviously lost a bit of importance as long as you're playing both Fromage and reverse. But of course, since we have Amaterasu, that's an additional reason to play it as well. And also because we have grade 3 heals, there's still some value in playing this card. So there's quite a handful of randomizing factors that you can make use of with a card like this. So it's quite good. And then we've got 3 copies of Coco in case you ever call her. Sorry, if you ride her. She's a free +1 if you ride her, but that obviously comes with a bit of a cost. It's basically Soul Blast 1 because you're calling her out from Soul. So as I said, this deck can have Soul issues. And this is kind of one of the ways of doing it. But her once per turn skill is so good because you can just stack throughout the entire game with this card. If you use reverse, you can lock her as well after using her ability. That's also a thing as well. And then we've got 4 copies of Torijas. This card is nuts. If you play Battle Sisters, you have to play this card. It's a free +1. They've actually reprinted cards like Trifle and Torijas along with Fromage in the recent Clan Collection. But to be honest with you, that first Clan Selection set of Battle Sisters, those cards are very staple, whereas the second wave of Battle Sisters aren't really staple. They're just decent cards to pick between, but you don't have to play them. But I think cards like Fromage, Torijas, and Trifle are absolute staples in any Battle Sister deck. I feel like not playing them is just like purposely doing damage yourself, whereas with Mocha and Coco and Reverse, there are arguments to why you don't need to play them, which is why it makes so much sense for them to reprint them in Clan Collection. It doesn't really tank the market in a negative way because they haven't really overprinted them so much, because the cards that people don't need as much already have less printing because of that, whereas they printed again the more important cards. So that's Torijas, very good for free plus. Also 13k booster if you reveal the card. You can also use her with Amaterasu, by the way. So if you reveal Amaterasu, you don't get the +1, but you still get the 10k crit to Vanguard, which is more the reason why Amaterasu works quite okay in Battle Sisters. Like, it's not that bad, because Battle Sisters does have a few skills that can make use of Amaterasu, whereas other decks not so much, like for example Tsukiyomi. Tsukiyomi can't reveal cards. Then we've got 4 Marmalades. So Marmalade is the Perfect Guard. Obviously you can see there's no Blitz Order. Although this is an older deck profile, before the Blitz Order came out, this is still quite relevant even now, because the Blitz Order isn't like, yeah, like so many decks are using them. I don't really like the Blitz Order because it's so generic and splash on every deck. But for PG decks, there's still a debate on whether or not to play 4 PGs or to play 3 PGs and 1 Blitz Order if you're relying on having additional names in your drop zone. because obviously it can get in the way of that. Even in Regalia, there's that debate going on with playing 4 Jotuns versus 3 Jotuns and 1 Blitz Order, which is more worth it, because you can't really search for Blitz Orders as well. So there is that too. But obviously, it's quite easy to find blitzes, I think, in ODT, because this card here, obviously you're filtering out so much of your deck, but he doesn't even call your blitz orders. You just put them back into your deck. So if you do accidentally search it, you just shuffle again, and then eventually you'll hit it as you're decking out. So the blitz order isn't that hard to see in ODT. Like, I think most games you'll see it in theory, although I haven't actually really played much ODT with blitz orders. So yeah, 4 Marmalades. This card is very good against very aggressive decks because you can keep drawing away opponents attacking you. I use this against Ripples. Actually, fun thing is this list was actually built around Ripples. So obviously this is now banned, so it might be a bit overkill now. If you went it up against Genovis, you probably have an easy win. Overtrigger. Overtrigger is obviously extra drive checks and 100 melee power. Very good with Dragon King as well, but also just good with stack abilities like Fromage Reverse especially. 3 Gingers. Obviously, bounces to crit, that's why I'm playing it, but also for the 10k power. I think this deck needs some 10k power because Trifoot is only a center restrict, it's not a full-on guard restrict. So the numbers still kind of matter. And I decided to cut Psychic Bird in the end because the deck has all these ride-up cards. So with on Vanguard ride skills, it sort of makes up a bit for not needing Psychic Bird. It's sort of like with Tsukiyomi. When I built Tsukiyomi, I cut Efficient Carp out. And the reason I could justify it was because the Tsukuyomi ride chain was doing the scrying for me, so I sort of compromised on the carp to let the ride chain do a bit of the scrying for me to fix the kind of brickiness in the deck. Then we've got 4 copies of Toto, so Celeste Witch Toto. This is the Stride Assist crit, obviously that's the reason I'm playing it. But this deck does have a lot of grade 3s, so you'll probably just be able to drop your other grade 3s Stride as well in some cases. Sometimes you don't want to, sometimes you'd rather just use them as rear guards. Then we've got 4 copies of Muffin. I think you can cut this down, maybe, but the thing is with Muffin is you do sort of want to see her early game, because if you use Trifle as a counterblast on place, your opponent can actually mess with you, because there's a few problems with Bow Sisters, which is that you need a counterblast when you ride Fromage. So if your opponent decides not to attack your Trifle, especially if you call units to rush your opponent, because you can't remove your rear guards from the field. So if they're able to attack your rear guards, or if they decide to just pass, then you go to grade 3, you ride, you don't have the counterblast because you missed the timing of your countercharging. And also if you play Reverse, Reverse is an act skill. So Muffin herself, she's a battle phase skill. So that makes her kind of slow. So the only time where it's ideal to use Muffin, if you're worried about damage now, is in the early game, like turn 2. Obviously if you do it that way, you have to shuffle your stack as well, because Trifle's stack becomes obviously invalidated if you shuffle Muffin into your deck. So there are contradictions in this deck. There are a few little kind of tricky things you have to kind of think between. It's very easy to misplay for this reason. So you need to have a bit of careful judgment there. Then we've got 4 grade 3 heals as well, because it's searchable via Troquette as well. And then onto the G-Zone. We've got here 2 copies of the Dragon King, so obviously this card's very free and builds a lot of advantage. Good recovery card, and also builds up hand. Activates triggers. Kind of forces your opponent to start guarding as well during the first stride. Then 2 copies of Stolen, so some people say don't play this card anymore. This card is still relevant because Dragon King, the thing is with Dragon King, yes it's free, but the thing is those triggers, they're basically fixed during the main phase, so if you don't get enough triggers, then the Dragon King isn't really as lethal at times, depending. So Stolen's another option as well, because Stolen, you're basically swinging with your Vanguard, and then you can swing with your rear guard after you do your drive checks. And obviously, if you're declaring your stack, like if you're doing your stack during the actual battle itself, that means both your Vanguard and your rear guard are now threatening. Whereas Dragon King, you're activating those triggers immediately. So that crit can only really be threatening with 1 unit attack because it's already fixed onto that unit. Whereas with Stolen or any sort of stacking ability, as opposed to like the the Susano style, locking triggers onto a unit, you're threatening your opponent by making them guard the Vanguard, otherwise they get sacked, or then after that having to guard the rear guard, because now that they've guarded the first attack, you're now just passing triggers to another attack. So that's why Stolen's still relevant for that reason. Also, she's a Soul Charge 1, So that's a little sneaky bit you can kind of make use of if you want to use Trifle. So there's that too. And then we've got Kamo Susano. Kamo Susano is basically good if you're losing the game, recovery. And because we're playing Trifle as the finisher, you may find opportunities to make use of that as well and just get kind of a little bit of Ghost Trick win. But otherwise, you can probably play something else like Dismal if you want to protect your copies of Trifle because you didn't draw into another one or something. Then there's 4 copies of Ichikishima, so I don't think there's any point explaining this one. And then we've got 2 copies of Momo because this deck, since we play Fromage, we draw a lot of cards, so this card's actually quite good. Also, Muffin works with this, so you can actually get the counter charge before her attack connects, or her attack goes off even. So this card's very good with both Fromage and Muffin as well. Also, if you play Mocha, Mocha stacks the top card of your deck. So when you ride grade 3, let's just say you ride reverse or something, right? Obviously, if you ride Fromage, you're going to feel a bit of buyer's remorse when you find, oh, I saw an over trigger on top of my deck. But now I have to miss out on the CB1 Soul Blast 1 draw 2, which by the way is another reason reverse is quite a good target to ride sometimes, because you can then just save her Fromage maybe for another time. And you can always just call her to rate anyway, so Momo is, yeah, she's just very reliable in this list. And this deck, the fact is, like, even though she's a very strong first try, this is sort of the reason why you've got to be careful with grade 2 game, because your opponent might be scared of Momo. And as long as they're scared of Momo, they will consider grade 2 gaming you, which is why reverse is also good, because reverse can punish them a bit for grade 2 gaming you. It's a ride up, and then you've got G-Guard into Ichikishima after that, so pretty decent. Then 2 copies of Amaterasu, because she's free and she soul charges as well. And as I mentioned earlier, the deck lacks soul charging. You may remember I didn't put Psychic Bird in this list as well, which is also part of the problem. Of course, because I was trying to get more power on my triggers. But obviously the effect of Psychic Bird doesn't really matter as much in this list. Then we've got 2 copies of Excite Bouncers the Bavrois. So Bavrois is basically a CB1 draw and then you reveal next card. The revealing is useful with Amaterasu, as I mentioned earlier. So sometimes, since we are playing Amaterasu, you may actually want to go into this more often. And then Octagonal Magus, she's kind of similar. She reveals the card as well. Like, she actually reveals the first one. So if you know you've got Amaterasu on top of your deck immediately, then you can just use her straight away as well. Or you can just randomly try and gutcha into something. Octagonal is actually quite a decent card because you can just like declare, like you can do some scenario planning with this card, where even if you don't know the top card of your deck, you can just declare grades just for sake of having the random +1, and then you just ignore the grades that you know if you reveal anyway that you're still benefiting from. So like for example, if you don't declare grade 3, let's just say, you're still going to benefit when you find that the top card of your deck is a heal, because you can damage check it, or an Amaterasu because you're still binding Amaterasu to get 10k power on your Vanguard. And then if you just maybe randomly declare grade 1 and 2, then you can just draw the grade 1 and 2. And if it's a grade 0, then that could also be a damage trigger as well. So you can just do like random grade calling sometimes, just for the sake of scenario planning, so that you can make kind of like, you can just find the middle ground of you know, like instead of having like a absolute worst case and absolute best case scenario through gambling, you could just go for a more balanced kind of guess and then just still benefit in some form or another. And that's more or less it with the Battle Sister deck profile. So yeah, let me know how you find it, and until then, I will see you guys later. Bye.